Everyone at Hawthorne Diner laughed at the quiet waitress. Customers dismissed her. Co-workers overlooked her. The city barely noticed she existed. Until Chicago's most feared mafia boss walked through the door and stood beside the woman no one thought was worth protecting. Rain fell steadily across downtown Chicago, transforming neon reflections into shimmering rivers of color beneath passing headlights. Inside Hawthorne Diner, the scent of fresh coffee and buttered toast drifted through the air while tired office workers, college students, and late-night regulars occupied worn leather booths. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't extraordinary. But for Nora Whitmore, it had become the closest thing to a safe place. At 26, Nora had perfected the art of becoming invisible. She moved gracefully between tables with quiet efficiency, balancing porcelain coffee cups and handwritten orders with practiced ease. Her dark chestnut hair remained secured in a simple low bun, while soft hazel eyes rarely lingered long enough to invite attention. She spoke politely, smiled when expected, and never took up more space than necessary. Life had taught her that silence was safer. People couldn't wound what they failed to notice. Years of emotional scars had shaped her into someone controlled and cautious. Growing up in a household where affection arrived unpredictably taught Nora to anticipate disappointment before hope. Dependence felt dangerous. Expectations led to heartbreak. So she avoided conflict, avoided attachment, avoided becoming memorable. Yet beneath her quiet exterior existed remarkable strength. Every double shift funded medication and treatments for the grandmother who raised her after everyone else left. Every dollar mattered. Every sacrifice was made without complaint. No one inside Hawthorne Diner knew. No one asked. A burst of laughter erupted from a corner booth, drawing Nora's attention. A group of well-dressed customers exchanged amused glances as one woman rolled her eyes. "Does she ever talk?" the woman whispered loudly enough to ensure Nora heard. Another customer smirked. "Maybe she thinks being mysterious makes her interesting." Heat crept beneath Nora's skin. Heart pounding softly against her ribs, she lowered her gaze and continued refilling coffee cups. "Ignore it. Smile. Keep moving." The younger waitresses behind the counter exchanged sympathetic looks before returning to conversations that excluded her entirely. Nora had grown accustomed to existing on the edges of other people's lives. The quiet waitress. The forgettable girl. The woman everyone learned to ignore. Outside, thunder rumbled softly above Chicago's skyline. Then the diner doors opened. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations faltered. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Fear arrived before recognition. Adrian Kane entered Hawthorne Diner with calm, deliberate steps. Tall and devastatingly handsome, Adrian carried the controlled power of a man accustomed to commanding entire rooms without raising his voice. Dark tailored trousers complemented a charcoal overcoat resting effortlessly across broad shoulders. His dark hair remained perfectly styled despite the rain, while sharp features and piercing eyes revealed nothing of the thoughts hidden beneath composure. People whispered stories about Adrian Kane, king of Chicago's most powerful syndicate. A dangerous man built from loyalty and control. Feared. Untouchable. Danger followed him into every room. 2 security personnel lingered near the entrance while Adrian surveyed the diner with unreadable calm. Then his attention settled on Nora. She looked away immediately. Heart pounding. People like Adrian Kane belonged to a different world. Power. Luxury. Empire. Men like him noticed women capable of matching their status. Not waitresses balancing chipped coffee mugs beneath fluorescent lights. Yet Adrian's gaze lingered. He noticed how she absorbed humiliation without cruelty. How kindness survived despite emotional wounds. How exhaustion softened her shoulders while determination strengthened her spine. Quiet wasn't weakness. It was endurance. Nora approached his booth moments later, not trusting herself to meet his eyes. "What can I get started for you tonight?" Her voice emerged soft but steady. Before Adrian could answer, one of the customers from earlier laughed under her breath. "Maybe the Mafia king likes women who don't talk back." The table erupted into hushed amusement. Humiliation tightened around Nora's chest. Breath caught painfully in her throat. She reached for her order pad, desperate to disappear. Then Adrian Kane stood. The movement alone silenced the diner. He stepped beside Nora with controlled ease, his presence forming an unspoken shield between her and the people who mocked her. No anger crossed his expression. Only certainty. The dangerous king looked toward the room with quiet authority before returning his attention to Nora. His voice remained low. Come. Close enough that only she could truly hear it. Nora Whitmore. Her fingers tightened around her notepad. Shock widened her hazel eyes. Because Adrian Kane hadn't asked her name. He already knew it. And suddenly, everyone inside Hawthorne Diner realized the city's most feared mafia boss had never viewed the quiet waitress as invisible at all. Nora Whitmore wasn't born quiet. She wasn't born afraid of attention or uncomfortable with affection. Life taught her those things. Because sometimes surviving means learning how to disappear before the world notices you're hurting. Long before Hawthorne Diner became her refuge, before coffee-stained order pads and polite smiles disguised exhaustion, Nora had been a little girl who laughed too loudly. She used to ask endless questions. She used to dance barefoot in the kitchen while old songs played from a crackling radio. She used to believe adults meant what they promised. Then reality arrived. Childhood unfolded inside a house ruled by unpredictability. Love appeared without warning and vanished just as quickly. Raised by a mother whose emotions shifted like storms rolling across Lake Michigan, Nora learned to study facial expressions before speaking. Some days brought warmth and affection. Other days demanded silence. As a child, she discovered that becoming small made her safer. The quieter she became, the less she attracted disappointment. The less she needed. The less it hurt. Fear settled into places no one could see. By 12, Nora had stopped asking people to stay. By 14, she stopped expecting them to. Then abandonment arrived wearing familiar faces. People left. Promises dissolved. The little girl who once laughed openly folded pieces of herself away until emotional control became second nature. Heart pounding behind a carefully neutral expression, she mastered the art of survival. Never burden anyone. Never reveal weakness. Never trust someone enough to let them become essential. The only person who remained constant was Eleanor Whitmore, her grandmother. While the world taught Nora to fear dependence, Eleanor taught her quiet resilience. Their modest apartment above a laundromat wasn't luxurious, but it held warmth. Homemade soup simmering on winter evenings. Shared crossword puzzles at the kitchen table. Soft reassurances delivered through wrinkled hands squeezing hers during difficult nights. Safe. Not perfect, but safe. As Eleanor's health declined over the years, their roles slowly reversed. Nora became caregiver. Working double shifts at Hawthorne Diner paid for prescriptions, medical appointments, and rent. Every tip folded carefully into envelopes represented another week of stability. She never complained. Loyalty wasn't obligation. It was love. Customers saw a reserved waitress. Co-workers noticed someone too quiet for gossip. No one recognized the emotionally scarred woman carrying entire worlds on exhausted shoulders. Hawthorne Diner became routine. Predictable. The scent of brewing coffee. The rhythmic sound of plates clattering against countertops. Familiar booths occupied by regular customers discussing weather forecasts and baseball scores. It gave Nora something childhood never had. Control. Within those walls, she understood expectations. Smile. Serve. Survive. No surprises. No heartbreak. No one looked closely enough to notice how carefully she protected herself. Until Adrian Kane. The memory of him speaking her name lingered long after his departure from the diner. Nora replayed the moment endlessly. The city's most feared mafia king hadn't asked who she was. He already knew. Fear whispered dangerous questions she refused to entertain. Why? People like Adrian Kane didn't notice women like Nora Whitmore. Yet somewhere beneath uncertainty, another feeling emerged. Curiosity. Across Chicago, Adrian sat inside the private study of Kane Manor overlooking the city's glittering skyline. Rain streaked across expansive windows while untouched whiskey rested beside stacks of intelligence reports. He should have been reviewing empire business. Instead, Nora Whitmore occupied his thoughts. Adrian understood performance. He recognized masks because he'd worn them himself. The The quiet waitress hiding behind emotional control intrigued him because strength often disguised itself as softness. He instructed discreet inquiries. Nothing invasive. Nothing threatening. He simply wanted to understand why a woman capable of such grace carried sadness behind her eyes. The reports unsettled him. 26 years old. No criminal history. Part-time college courses abandoned due to financial hardship. Primary caregiver to elderly grandmother battling chronic illness. Multiple jobs over several years. No complaints. No requests for help. Sacrifice after sacrifice woven quietly into ordinary days. Adrian studied photographs showing Nora leaving pharmacies carrying prescription bags before beginning overnight shifts. Security footage captured her helping strangers without expectation of gratitude. She gave pieces of herself away while asking nothing in return. Heart pounding unexpectedly against controlled composure, Adrian recognized something rare. Loyalty untouched by ambition. Kindness surviving hardship. Strength hidden beneath silence. Then another file appeared. His expression darkened immediately. Additional surveillance photographs. Unknown sources. Dates extending back nearly 6 months. Someone had been documenting Nora's routines. Photographs outside Hawthorne Diner. Near Eleanor's apartment. At grocery stores. Hospitals. A pattern emerged. Deliberate. Patient. Dangerous. Fear settled cold beneath Adrian's skin. Because he hadn't been the first man paying attention to Nora Whitmore. Someone else had been watching the quiet waitress long before Chicago's most feared king walked into Hawthorne Diner. And whoever they were, they already knew exactly how invisible she'd taught herself to become. Power attracts attention. People chase it. Admire it. Fear it. Women from Chicago's most influential families attended charity galas hoping for Adrian Kane's attention. Heiresses memorized his preferences before carefully positioning themselves within his orbit. Socialites whispered his name beneath crystal chandeliers, convinced proximity to the king of Chicago's most feared syndicate could transform their futures. But Adrian Kane ignored them all. Instead, he chose the waitress everyone else mocked. 3 days passed after Hawthorne Diner fell silent beneath Adrian's presence. 3 days of Nora Whitmore replaying the moment he said her name. Fear and curiosity battled quietly inside her. Nothing about Adrian Kane made sense. Power rarely noticed women like Nora. She had built her life around predictability. Morning pharmacy visits for her grandmother's medication. Afternoon shifts beneath Hawthorne Diner's flickering lights. Evening walks home through familiar Chicago streets. There was comfort in routine. Safety in remaining unnoticed. Yet safety became impossible the moment Adrian Kane looked at her as though invisibility had never suited her. The diner doors opened again on Thursday evening. Conversations immediately softened. Nora's breath caught. Heart pounding against her ribs, she steadied the tray balanced carefully against her palm. Adrian entered alone this time. No dramatic entourage. No visible display of authority. Just a devastatingly handsome man wrapped in a charcoal overcoat, rain lingering against dark hair, moving through the diner with calm confidence. People whispered. Always whispers. The king had returned. He chose the same booth near the windows overlooking rain-covered Chicago streets. And waited. Nora approached carefully. "What can I get for you?" Her voice remained professional despite the awareness tightening beneath her skin. Adrian looked up from the newspaper resting before him. The usual. Confusion flickered across her features. He noticed. Black coffee. A pause. 2 sugars. Surprise softened her guarded expression. She hadn't realized he'd remembered. Nora nodded quietly before retreating toward the counter. Small gestures shouldn't matter. Yet somehow they did. Because being seen frightened her more than cruelty ever had. Cruelty was familiar. Attention wasn't. Days turned into weeks. Adrian returned often. Never demanding. Never intrusive. He listened when Nora spoke and respected silence when she didn't. Their conversations remained brief but meaningful. Favorite books. Chicago Snowfall. The grandmother waiting at home. He noticed details others overlooked. the way exhaustion settled beneath Nora's eyes after double shifts. The careful way she wrapped leftovers for homeless regulars. How kindness remained intact despite emotional scars. Protection arrived quietly. A replacement heater appeared anonymously outside Eleanor Whitmore's apartment building during the season's first freeze. An overdue medical bill vanished without explanation. Fresh groceries appeared after Nora worked 16 consecutive hours. She discovered assistance without obligation. No notes. No conditions. Fear tightened whenever she recognized Adrian's fingerprints hidden beneath generosity. Dependence felt dangerous. She had survived by relying only on herself. "You can't fix everything." The words slipped out unexpectedly one rainy evening. Adrian glanced toward her. "I know." "Then why?" His dark eyes held hers. "Because caring isn't weakness." Close. Honest. Controlled. The answer unsettled her. People left. People disappointed. People changed. Nora had built walls for survival. Adrian stood patiently outside them. Across Chicago's elite circles, rumors spread quickly. The king had chosen a waitress. Country club conversations transformed into judgment disguised as concern. They mocked her background, questioned her intentions, dismissed her worth. Women who once competed for Adrian's attention whispered that infatuation would fade. A quiet girl from Hawthorne Diner could never belong beside power. Nora overheard enough to understand. Fear resurfaced. She didn't belong in Adrian's world. Empire. Influence. Danger. "You should walk away." The words escaped one evening as rain painted silver streaks across Hawthorne's windows. Adrian studied her carefully. "Is that what you want?" Nora hesitated. Heart pounding. "No." But fear rarely listened to desire. "I don't fit into your life." A silence settled between them. Then Adrian leaned back slightly. "My father taught me something before he died." His voice lowered. "The strongest people in the city are usually the ones no one notices." Nora looked toward him. "I've spent my entire life being underestimated." His expression softened. "So have I." For the first time, she saw something beyond power. Loneliness. Responsibility. The burden of protecting everyone while trusting almost no one. The dangerous king revealed pieces of himself few ever witnessed. Respect deepened into understanding. Curiosity transformed into attraction neither acknowledged aloud. Nora wasn't fragile. She wasn't dazzled by wealth. And Adrian wasn't interested in obedience. He admired resilience. Loyalty. The quiet strength hidden behind emotionally controlled smiles. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Not through force, but through surviving without surrendering kindness. Late that evening, Nora finished her shift beneath Hawthorne Diner's familiar glow. The city outside had grown cold. She gathered her belongings and slipped into her coat before reaching inside her locker. Her fingers brushed unfamiliar paper. Fear tightened instantly. Slowly, she unfolded the envelope. No name. No return address. Only one sentence written in elegant handwriting. "Stay away from him before they destroy you too." Nora's breath caught. Heart pounding violently. Because somewhere beyond Chicago's glittering skyline, someone had noticed the dangerous man choosing the quiet waitress. And they wanted her frightened enough to disappear before history repeated itself. The people mocking Nora Whitmore thought they understood weakness. They mistook silence for helplessness, kindness for fragility, reserve for insignificance. They never questioned why someone had spent years teaching Nora to stay small, until hidden truths threatened an entire empire. The anonymous warning remained folded inside Nora's coat pocket long after she finished her shift at Hawthorne Diner. "Stay away from him before they destroy you too." She had reread the sentence so many times that the edges of the paper had begun to soften beneath trembling fingertips. Fear settled quietly beneath her skin. Not because someone wanted to frighten her, but because the message implied something worse. Someone knew exactly who she was. Rain tapped against the apartment windows as Nora sat beside Eleanor Whitmore's recliner, watching her grandmother drift peacefully to sleep beneath a knitted blanket. The apartment smelled faintly of chamomile tea and lavender lotion. Safe, small, familiar. Everything Nora had built her life around protecting existed within those modest walls. Her grandmother stirred softly. "You look worried," Eleanor whispered. Nora forced a gentle smile. "Just tired." Lies came easier when spoken to protect people she loved. But that night, sleep refused to come. Questions whispered through every quiet corner of her mind. Who sent the warning? Why Adrian? Why now? The following afternoon, Adrian Kane arrived outside Hawthorne Diner before Nora's shift ended. He stood beside a sleek black sedan beneath Chicago's gray skies, his expression composed despite the tension hidden behind dark eyes. Nora hesitated before approaching. "You shouldn't be here." His gaze settled calmly on her. "Someone threatened you." Her breath caught. "You knew. You weren't careful enough hiding the note." Annoyance flickered briefly through her fear. "I don't need protection." Adrian's voice remained even. "Everyone needs protection sometimes." The statement lingered between them. Close. Uncomfortable. Dangerously comforting. Heart-pounding beneath controlled breaths, Nora finally surrendered the folded warning into his waiting hand. Adrian reviewed it silently, then looked toward her. "This isn't random." Fear tightened inside her chest. "What does that mean?" "It means someone wanted you frightened." He paused. "And people rarely invest this much effort into someone they consider unimportant." For the first time, Nora wished she truly had been invisible. Hours later, she found herself seated inside Kane Manor's private archive room. Luxury surrounded her. Mahogany shelves lined with records. Antique chandeliers casting warm light across polished floors. Generations of Kane family history preserved behind locked glass cabinets. It felt impossibly distant from Hawthorne Diner. Adrian stood nearby, sleeves rolled neatly above strong forearms as old files covered the expansive table between them. "You said you knew very little about your parents." Nora nodded slowly. "My mother died when I was young." "And your father?" She looked away. "I don't know." Abandonment had always been a blank space. Questions Eleanor struggled to answer. Memories blurred by grief and childhood confusion. Adrian's investigators uncovered inconsistencies. Missing school records. Medical files that ended abruptly. Property transfers completed under unfamiliar names. Entire years missing from public documentation. The more Nora read, the colder fear became. "I don't understand." Adrian's expression darkened. "Someone erased parts of your history." Silence settled heavily across the archive. Outside, rain continued painting silver lines against towering windows. Inside, Nora's carefully controlled world shifted beneath her feet. People erased threats. Witnesses. Heirs. Not waitresses. Why would anyone do this? Adrian studied the documents thoughtfully. "Because you mattered to someone powerful." The possibility stole her breath. Fear collided with anger. She had spent years believing she came from nothing. Believing her ordinary life made sense. What if ordinary had been carefully constructed? More records surfaced. A trust established decades earlier. Assets hidden beneath legal barriers. An inheritance quietly waiting untouched. Nora stared at the paperwork in disbelief. "I've been struggling to afford medication." Her voice trembled. "And all this time, someone kept the truth from you." Betrayal arrived in unexpected forms. Not always through cruelty. Sometimes through silence. Nora folded her arms tightly around herself. "I don't know who I am anymore." Adrian stepped closer. Close enough for reassurance without intrusion. "You are still Nora." Hazel eyes lifted toward him. The woman who worked double shifts for her grandmother. The woman who remained kind despite hardship. The woman who survived. His voice softened. "None of that changes." Something fragile inside her loosened. Trust. Tentative. Terrifying. Because for the first time in years, Nora allowed someone close enough to witness uncertainty without shame. She wasn't a victim. She became powerful. Not because fear disappeared, but because she faced it anyway. One final box remained untouched at the end of the archive table. Dust coated its corners. Adrian opened it carefully. Inside rested photographs preserved through decades. Charity events, family gatherings, business celebrations. Nora sorted through them absent-mindedly, then stopped breathing, heart pounding violently against her ribs. Her fingers tightened around one particular photograph. A beautiful young woman smiled toward the camera. Dark hair, familiar eyes, the same delicate features Nora saw every morning in the mirror. Her mother. Standing beside a distinguished man she recognized instantly from portraits displayed throughout Kane Manor. Adrian's father, the founder of the Kane Empire. Fear crashed into disbelief, because suddenly the warning made horrifying sense. Someone hadn't mocked the wrong waitress. They had hidden the truth about Nora Whitmore for years. And whatever connected her late mother to Adrian Kane's family had the power to destroy everything they thought they knew. The quiet waitress everyone pitied was never fragile. She was simply waiting for permission she no longer needed. Queens aren't born. Sometimes they awaken. Rain drummed softly against the towering windows of Kane Manor as Nora Whitmore sat alone in the private archive room, staring at the photograph resting between trembling fingertips. Her mother, standing beside Adrian Kane's father, smiling as though she belonged there. The image shattered every story Nora had spent years believing. She wasn't ordinary. She wasn't invisible. And perhaps most devastating of all, her entire life had been shaped by truths carefully hidden beyond her reach. Fear tightened around her chest. The familiar instinct to retreat whispered through her thoughts. Stay quiet. Stay small. Pretend none of this exists. It had protected her before. It had helped her survive childhood disappointments, abandonment, and years spent carrying responsibilities too heavy for one person. But survival no longer felt enough. Heart-pounding beneath measured breaths, Nora looked toward her own reflection in the archive's polished glass cabinets. For the first time in years, she saw herself clearly. Not as the waitress everyone dismissed. Not as the frightened girl who apologized for taking up space. But as a woman who had endured everything designed to break her. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Adrian found her hours later standing near the estate balcony overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. "You should rest," he said quietly. Nora didn't turn around immediately. Everyone spent years deciding who I was. The city lights reflected in her hazel eyes. They mocked me because they thought I wouldn't fight back. Adrian studied her profile. "You don't have to carry this alone." For once, Nora didn't answer with automatic resistance. Instead, she faced him directly. "I don't want you fixing things for me. Close. Honest. Terrifying. I want the truth." Something unreadable shifted behind Adrian's dark gaze. Respect. Because the woman standing before him wasn't seeking rescue. She was demanding answers. The following days transformed everything. Nora stopped shrinking herself inside rooms designed to intimidate her. She joined meetings involving Kane Empire advisors. She reviewed records others overlooked. She listened carefully while powerful men underestimated her intelligence simply because kindness softened her voice. They mistook gentleness for weakness. A mistake Nora quietly encouraged. Observation had always been her greatest strength. Working at Hawthorne Diner taught her how people revealed themselves through small details. The nervous tapping of fingers. Avoided eye contact. The hesitation before carefully chosen words. People rarely guarded themselves around women they considered harmless. Nora noticed everything. During one strategy session, she interrupted politely. "The dates don't match." Silence followed. Senior advisors exchanged skeptical glances. Adrian looked toward her. "What do you mean?" Nora adjusted the file before her. "The missing records began months before my mother's death." She pointed toward financial transactions hidden beneath layers of legal documentation. Someone anticipated this. Fear settled across the room. Because Nora was right. The hidden inheritance wasn't accidental. Someone had carefully orchestrated an erasure. Adrian's expression darkened. They planned this. Nora met his gaze steadily. They planned for me never to ask questions. The room fell silent. Power shifted. Not because Nora demanded attention, but because she earned it. Respect deepened inside Adrian in ways he struggled to articulate. He had admired her resilience, her loyalty, the kindness surviving despite emotional scars. Now he admired something even more dangerous. Her mind. The quiet waitress saw truths others missed. Heart-pounding unexpectedly, Adrian realized Nora challenged him in ways no one else dared. "You trusted your instincts before anyone else did," he admitted later that evening. They stood inside Kane Manor's library surrounded by antique books and soft amber lighting. Nora smiled faintly. "I spent my life reading people. Because you had to. Because I needed to survive." Adrian stepped closer. Close enough to hear each other's breathing. "You don't have to survive anymore." Emotion flickered across Nora's expression. Fear. Hope. Disbelief. What if I don't know how to stop? His voice softened. "Then we'll learn together." The confession settled heavily between them. Emotional surrender arrived quietly. Not through dramatic declarations, but through trust. Adrian stopped seeing Nora as someone fragile enough to shield from difficult truths. Nora stopped viewing dependence as weakness. Partnership emerged where fear once lived. For the first time in her life, Nora understood something revolutionary. Being protected didn't mean surrendering power. It meant allowing someone worthy to stand beside you. Days later, another discovery surfaced. An old contact connected to her mother's hidden past agreed to share information. But there was a condition. The meeting required discretion. No empire. No advisors. No Adrian Kane. Fear whispered warnings immediately. Danger pressed close enough to taste. Adrian's jaw tightened after hearing the proposal. It could be a trap. It could be answers. You don't know who's waiting. Nora's pulse raced beneath controlled composure. "I know. You don't have to do this." She looked toward the man who had taught her that love didn't demand silence. Then she lifted her chin. "I've spent my entire life hiding from things designed to frighten me." Rain rolled softly against Kane Manor's windows. The city waited beyond them. Uncertain. Dangerous. "I won't do that anymore." Adrian searched her face. The waitress everyone mocked had disappeared. In her place stood a queen. Fear still existed, but courage stood beside it. Without hesitation, Nora reached for her coat. Heart pounding. Eyes unwavering. Because somewhere in Chicago, someone had spent years hunting her family. And this time, Nora Whitmore willingly stepped into danger to discover why. The strongest men aren't afraid of enemies. They negotiate with danger. They prepare for betrayal. They build empires designed to survive war. But the strongest men fear something far more devastating. Losing the one person who taught them what home feels like. Adrian Kane had spent most of his life believing attachment was a liability. Growing up beneath the shadow of the Kane Empire meant understanding sacrifice before understanding happiness. Loyalty was earned through action. Control kept people alive. Distance protected everyone from disappointment. Love complicated judgment. Fear weakened kings. At least, that was what Adrian had convinced himself. Until Nora Whitmore walked into Hawthorne Diner wearing a faded apron and an apologetic smile that never reached her eyes. She had changed everything. Rain washed across Kane Manor's towering windows as Adrian stood alone inside his private study, Chicago's skyline glowing beneath midnight clouds. Untouched documents remained scattered across his desk while thoughts of Nora occupied spaces business once controlled. He remembered the way she thanked people who rarely noticed her kindness. The exhaustion she carried without complaint. The courage hidden beneath softness. Heart pounding beneath practiced composure, Adrian acknowledged the truth he had spent weeks avoiding. He wasn't afraid of the enemies waiting beyond the Empire's walls. He was afraid of losing her. Across the city, Nora folded freshly washed blankets inside Eleanor Whitmore's apartment. The familiar scent of lavender and old books drifted through the modest space she had fought so hard to preserve. Her grandmother sat near the window, quietly knitting while snowflakes began dusting Chicago streets outside. "You've changed," Eleanor observed gently. Nora hesitated. Fear whispered immediately. Change meant uncertainty. Uncertainty invited loss. "What if I become someone I don't recognize?" Nora asked softly. Eleanor's smile carried decades of wisdom. "You're becoming someone who finally knows her worth." Emotion tightened inside Nora's chest. For years, abandonment had shaped every decision she made. She expected people to leave. Expected love to disappear the moment she needed it too much. Depending on Adrian terrified her. Because safe places rarely lasted forever. Hours later, Nora arrived at Kane Manor carrying homemade soup for Eleanor's prescriptions Adrian had helped arrange earlier that afternoon. The grand estate no longer intimidated her. But vulnerability still did. She found Adrian standing beside the fireplace in the library. Dark trousers. White dress shirt with sleeves rolled above his forearms. His expression softened the moment he noticed her. Close. Familiar. Dangerously comforting. "I spoke with the investigators," Adrian said quietly. "The contact connected to your mother's history disappeared before the meeting." Fear settled heavily between them. "You think someone silenced them?" "I think someone doesn't want us finding answers." Nora lowered her gaze. "They've always been ahead of us." Adrian moved closer. "Then we'll move smarter. Not control. Partnership." Something warm flickered beneath Nora's ribs. For the first time in years, fear wasn't hers alone to carry. The investigation intensified over the following days. Old financial records surfaced. Forgotten witnesses changed statements. Hidden trusts connected influential names across Chicago's elite circles. One truth emerged repeatedly. Someone powerful had orchestrated Nora's erasure. Someone with access, resources, patience. Danger no longer felt distant. It breathed against the back of their necks. Despite growing risks, Nora refused to retreat. She transferred Eleanor temporarily into Kane Manor's private medical wing under discreet supervision. At first, guilt consumed her. "I'm disrupting your life." Adrian looked almost offended. "You protect the people you love." Nora blinked. "So do I. Protect. Shield. Safe. Mine." The words settled unspoken between them. That evening, Eleanor drifted asleep beneath warm blankets while Nora stood near the medical wing's balcony overlooking snow-covered gardens. Adrian joined her quietly. "Do you ever regret letting people close?" Nora asked. His answer arrived without hesitation. "Every time I've lost someone." She turned toward him. "Then why risk it again?" The dangerous king who ruled Chicago lowered every defense he possessed. "Because some people become worth the fear." Heart-pounding, Nora struggled to breathe. Adrian's voice softened. "I know how to survive betrayal." He looked toward the city beyond Kane Manor. "I know how to lead empires." Then his gaze found hers. "But losing you." Silence wrapped around them. "That's the first thing I've never been prepared for." Tears threatened behind Nora's eyes. The emotionally controlled woman who once measured love through exits and escape routes finally understood something terrifying. Home wasn't always a place. Sometimes it was a person. She stepped closer. Not because fear disappeared, but because trust outweighed it. She was not a victim. She became powerful. And power sometimes looked like choosing connection despite heartbreak. Adrian reached for her hand. No demands. No promises he couldn't keep. Only presence. Safe. Loyal. Real. Then the moment shattered. One of Adrian's senior advisors entered the balcony with visible urgency, a confidential file clutched tightly against his chest. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Adrian reviewed the evidence in silence. Security logs. Financial transfers. Private communications. His expression darkened with every page. Fear turned cold beneath Nora's skin. Because the truth was worse than they imagined. The enemy hunting Nora hadn't operated alone. Someone inside Adrian Kane's trusted inner circle had been feeding information for years. Someone who knew the Empire's secrets. Someone who knew Nora's routines. Someone they had welcomed into their lives. And suddenly, betrayal wasn't waiting outside the kingdom. It had been sitting at the king's table all along. Everyone mocked the waitress. Now they stood when she entered the room. Because the woman they underestimated had become impossible to ignore. Snow drifted softly across Chicago's skyline as Kane Manor awakened beneath the weight of betrayal. The grand estate remained elegant as ever. Crystal chandeliers illuminated marble corridors while fireplaces crackled behind carved stone mantels. Yet beneath the luxury, fear moved through the empire like a silent whisper. Someone close had betrayed them. Someone trusted. Someone who had sat at Adrian Kane's table while secretly helping erase Nora Whitmore's past. Inside the Kane Command Center, silence wrapped around everyone gathered before the glowing digital screens. Advisors. Security chiefs. Men and women who had spent years serving the empire. No one spoke. Because betrayal carried a particular kind of grief. Adrian stood at the head of the room, his expression carved from controlled calm. Dark tailored suit. Steady posture. The king his empire depended on. Yet those who knew him best noticed the difference. He wasn't standing alone. Nora stood beside him. The quiet waitress from Hawthorne Diner. The woman everyone once ignored. Heart pounding beneath curious stares, Nora lifted her chin despite the uncertainty threatening beneath her composure. Months ago, rooms like this would have terrified her. Power intimidated people who grew up fighting merely to survive. But survival had transformed into something stronger. She wasn't there because Adrian rescued her. She was there because she belonged. The evidence appeared across the command center screens. Financial transfers. Manipulated records. Restricted access logs. A name surfaced repeatedly. Vincent Mercer. Adrian's longtime legal advisor. A man who attended family holidays. A trusted mentor. Someone Eleanor herself once described as polite. Fear settled heavily over the room. Adrian's jaw tightened. How long? One of the analysts lowered his eyes. Nearly 12 years. A quiet breath escaped Nora's lips. 12 years. Someone had shaped the destruction of her history while smiling across conference tables. Betrayal wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it wore familiar faces. Sometimes it offered reassurance while quietly building cages. Nora looked toward Adrian. His expression remained composed. But pain lived behind his eyes. Loyalty mattered to men like Adrian Kane. Family wasn't defined through blood. It was earned, chosen, protected. Vincent Mercer had violated something sacred. For a moment, Nora's instinct urged her to retreat. The old version of herself would have disappeared into the background. Allowed others to decide her future. Stayed quiet. Then she remembered Hawthorne Diner. The laughter. The dismissal. The years she spent apologizing for existing. Fear had protected her once. But fear no longer controlled her. Heart pounding steadily, Nora stepped forward. The movement captured everyone's attention. "I know betrayal," she said softly. No one interrupted. "I know what it feels like to discover the people meant to protect you failed." Her hazel eyes moved around the room. "But if fear decides what happens next?" She paused. "Then the people who hurt us still win." Silence followed. Then something extraordinary happened. People listened. Not because Adrian stood beside her. Because Nora's words carried truth. The waitress everyone mocked understood survival better than anyone inside that room. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Adrian looked at her with something deeper than admiration. Respect. Close. Unshakable. Pride. He had protected Nora because he recognized goodness beneath emotional scars. Now he understood something greater. Queens didn't emerge through inheritance. They rose through resilience. Later that evening, Nora returned to Kane Manor's private medical wing. Eleanor rested comfortably near the window overlooking snow-covered gardens. The older woman smiled softly upon seeing her granddaughter. "You look different." Nora sat beside her. "Do I?" "You stopped asking permission to be yourself." Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Nora's throat. Eleanor squeezed her hand gently. You always had strength. Safe. The word wrapped around Nora's heart. Home wasn't the apartment above the laundromat. It wasn't Kane Manor's marble halls. It was belonging. It was knowing the people you loved chose you freely. Hours later, Nora found Adrian alone inside the estate library. The city glowed beyond towering windows. Chicago. Beautiful. Dangerous. Alive. You trusted Vincent, Nora whispered. Adrian stared into the fireplace. He helped raise this empire. You couldn't have known. His gaze shifted toward her. Fear makes kings suspicious. He paused. But you taught me trust isn't weakness. Nora moved closer. Close enough to hear each other's breathing. You taught me needing people doesn't make me fragile. His hand found hers instinctively. Mine. Not ownership. Choice. Loyalty. The quiet promise to remain. For several heartbeats, neither looked away. Emotional dependency had once frightened them both. Now it felt like sanctuary. Safe place. Protector. Queen. King. The titles mattered less than the truth beneath them. They had become each other's home. 3 days later, Kane operatives arrived at Vincent Mercer's private residence expecting answers. Instead, they discovered silence. The house stood empty. Personal belongings abandoned. Computers erased. Records destroyed. The enemy had disappeared before justice arrived. Fear returned instantly. Because disappearing required preparation. Someone had warned him. Inside the abandoned study, one investigator noticed a single object resting neatly atop the polished desk. A thick black file. Untouched. Waiting. Adrian opened it slowly. Nora's pulse thundered inside her chest. Because written across the front in elegant silver lettering were 2 words that stole the air from the room. Nora Whitmore. And suddenly, the quiet queen realized her story had only just begun. Most women dream of being rescued. Nora Whitmore discovered something better. Standing beside a dangerous man who never asked her to become smaller to be loved. Months passed, and Chicago slowly settled into a rhythm that no longer revolved around fear. Winter surrendered to spring. Snow-covered streets gave way to blooming magnolia trees lining the city's historic neighborhoods. Hawthorne Diner reopened after renovations funded anonymously through acts of generosity. Nora eventually stopped questioning. Kane Manor remained powerful and untouchable in the eyes of the city, yet behind its grand walls, something softer had taken root. Peace. Not perfect peace, but the kind earned through surviving storms together. Nora stood behind Hawthorne Diner's counter one quiet morning, sunlight filtering through wide windows instead of the rain that once accompanied so many of her memories. The familiar scent of coffee beans and cinnamon pastries drifted through the air. Only this time, people looked at her differently. The same customers who once dismissed her offered warm greetings. Co-workers sought her opinion. People noticed when she entered the room. Not because she stood beside Adrian Kane. Because she had finally stepped into the light she once feared. She had stopped apologizing for existing. She wasn't the quiet waitress everyone pitied. She was the woman who survived abandonment without surrendering kindness. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Across town, Eleanor Whitmore recovered steadily beneath attentive care. Her laughter returned in small moments over shared breakfasts and evening card games inside Kane Manor's sunlit conservatory. Safe. The word no longer felt temporary. Nora watched her grandmother teasing Adrian over his inability to lose gracefully at board games, and emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. Found family. She spent years believing family existed only through obligation and sacrifice. Now she understood that family could also be chosen. Built. Protected. Loved. That evening, Kane Manor hosted an intimate celebration beneath strings of golden lights woven throughout the estate gardens. No politicians. No business alliances. No empire obligations. Only the people who mattered. Trusted staff. Eleanor. A handful of loyal souls who remained when betrayal threatened everything. The city knew Adrian Kane as a king built from control and quiet danger. Tonight, Nora saw something else. A man laughing softly beneath spring skies. A protector learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness. Heart pounding gently beneath the soft emerald dress she wore, Nora noticed Adrian watching her from across the garden. His expression held the same intensity she remembered from the first night he entered Hawthorne Diner. Only now, fear no longer separated them. He crossed the distance between them with measured confidence. Close. Familiar. Home. You've been smiling all evening, Adrian observed. Nora glanced toward Eleanor's laughter echoing nearby. I never thought life could look like this. His gaze softened. What part? Being happy without waiting for it to disappear. Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Adrian spoke with a quiet honesty that still surprised her. I spent years believing protecting people meant never letting them close enough to hurt me. His dark eyes held hers. You changed that. Nora's breath caught. Fear had once taught her that love demanded sacrifice. That needing someone guaranteed abandonment. She spent years hiding pieces of herself to remain acceptable. Smaller. Quieter. Less. Adrian never asked her to become less. He encouraged her voice. Trusted her instincts. Respected her choices. Protected her freedom. Love hadn't trapped her. It had expanded her world. Nora stepped closer. Close enough to hear each other's breathing beneath the distant sound of jazz drifting through the gardens. I thought powerful people only wanted obedience. A faint smile touched Adrian's lips. I've never wanted obedience. His fingers intertwined with hers. Only loyalty. Mine. Not possession. Choice. Safe. Not captivity. Shield. Not control. Tears gathered unexpectedly in Nora's eyes. Because for the first time in her life, she understood something extraordinary. Love wasn't losing yourself to someone powerful. It was being seen completely, and still being chosen. The little girl who learned silence as survival had finally found her voice. The waitress everyone ignored discovered she deserved space in every room she entered. The emotionally scarred woman who feared abandonment stopped preparing for goodbye. She became a queen in her own right. Not because a king loved her, but because she learned to love herself enough to stop shrinking. Hours later, as the celebration faded into quiet conversations beneath the stars, one of Kane Manor's attendants approached carrying a single envelope. No return address. No explanation. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Heart-pounding, Nora accepted it carefully. Fear whispered through familiar corners of her heart. Adrian moved beside her without hesitation. Protective. Steady. Safe. Slowly, Nora opened the envelope. Inside rested an old photograph. A little girl stood outside a school playground wearing oversized shoes and a faded yellow coat. 7-year-old Nora Whitmore. Her innocent smile carried none of the burdens waiting ahead. Nora's fingers trembled. She turned the photograph over. Elegant handwriting stretched across the back. They mocked the wrong girl. Silence swallowed the garden. Adrian's expression darkened immediately. Danger settled cold against the fragile peace they had built. Because somewhere beyond Chicago's glittering skyline, someone else remembered exactly who Nora Whitmore really was. And this time, the quiet waitress wouldn't face the truth alone.